Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's really an honor. I did enjoy all the presentations yesterday. I did enjoy the Ted Cruz presentation. I felt like I knew all those guys, even though I never met them, mainly because I watched every one of their interviews and had to attack them every day. I enjoyed the Bernie Sanders presentation. One of the major sources of traffic actually to the America Rising website for anti-Hillary Clinton content are Bernie Sanders fans. So it was awesome to see how they created that digital army and audience for us. And if Ron from the Ted Cruz campaign was still here, I would apologize to him. I didn't know when I sparked the controversy that it would lead him to canceling his Honduras visit. So those were very interesting presentations. It was very interesting debate last night. I'll comment on that really briefly. I think what you saw, and we'll talk about this a little bit today on opposition research, is a Donald Trump who came much more prepared with a lot of oppo that he was dropping throughout the debate. It was definitely better than the first debate, where his strategy lasted about 15 minutes, and then it clearly fell apart toward the end. I think they both went back and forth. This is probably the first time we've ever seen one candidate promise to lock up another candidate. So I think there will be a lot of reverberations over the next few days. You saw the instant polls, which definitely had it a lot closer than the first debate. But I think in this current context, the last 96 hours, we've clearly seen how opposition research is playing a huge part in the U.S. election to date, with the Washington Post story, with the Donald Trump video, the debate last night, and who knows what might come in the next few days. It's funny, right before I came over here, I did an election briefing for a hedge fund in which they asked me, would there be any more October surprises? And I said to them, with Donald Trump, isn't everything already out there? How could there be more October surprises? He's attacked POWs and so forth, and lo and behold, 2 days later, major October surprise. So I'm here to talk about opposition research and the influence it has on message development in 2016. I thought I would do that in two parts. One, do a little bit of introduction to America Rising, which I think would conceptualize what opposition research is in the United States. And then two, provide some lessons learned from my Rubio campaign experience and how that's going to influence opposition research and message development within the United States for the next few years. So first, when it comes to opposition research, both parties have developed highly intricate infrastructure outside of the normal party committees. So outside of the Republican National Committee and outside of the Democratic National Committee. You have groups that are dedicated to grassroots efforts. You have groups that are dedicated to paid media campaigns that will do $100 million plus a year in paid media television ads. Those are represented by Priorities USA on the Democrat side and American Crossroads on the Republican side. You have outside super PACs that are just dedicated to Senate races, just dedicated to House races on both sides. What you have on the opposition research side is two groups dedicated to just doing pure opposition research on opposition candidates. In 2010, the Democrats formed American Bridge, which is solely focused on researching Republican candidates. So in 2013, we knew we had to catch up to what they were doing, and they always love when I say that. So we were catching up to what they were doing. So Mitt Romney's former campaign manager, Matt Rhodes, and I came together to form America Rising in 2013. And what America Rising is an outside group focused purely on conducting opposition research, war room media monitoring, rapid response communications, and candidate video tracking of Democrat candidates to defeat them. Plain and simple. And that creates a system in which we're doing the opposition research book on Democrat candidates. We're going through everything they've ever done in their public lives, compiling it, analyzing it through our research analysts. Through our war room media monitoring, we're watching everything they say every single day on local TV, national TV, local print, and so forth to create rapid response communications opportunities. So if they said something different than we have in our opposition research data file, that creates a rapid response opportunity. And then for the Republican Party, rerun all the candidate video trackers all across the country whose sole job is to go to Democrat events and tape those events and send the video back to HQ. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is a highly intricate system that we've built at America Rising. So what was our 2014 impact? Just to give you more idea of how big this is in the United States. Ultimately, our job is to partner with different GOP and conservative groups. So in 2014, we partnered with 47 different groups to provide them with their opposition research, their war room media monitoring, their rapid response, and their video tracking. Ultimately, that research and that tracking was used in 189 different paid TV ads in 2014 against Democrat candidates. The map below is every state that we tracked in 2014. Ultimately, we targeted 154 different Democrat candidates through our total complete system at America Rising. To give you an idea of how big it's growing in 2016, we are currently working with over 100 different GOP and conservative outfits all across the country to do their opposition research. Our ads will surpass that number by probably 100 this cycle. And we have now tracked in every state, and we actually did our first successful tracking in Australia about 2 months ago. So we've gone international with our tracking. I don't know the laws here, but I do know it's illegal to do it in the UK. We've researched that. So ultimately, this is growing in scale within the United States. And ultimately, in 2014, in the postmortem about why Republicans had success, the RNC was good enough to point out that America Rising's work had created a complete system that was holding Democrats accountable by doing that opposition research all the way to the candidate video tracking. And our sole focus at America Rising, we have a communications team that focuses solely on earned media communications. We don't actually do any TV ads out of America Rising. We focus on spreading our opposition research, our rapid response opportunities through earned free communications to create headlines that are used against Democratic candidates. And then we spread some information using digital efforts as well. But I think this quote on Stu Rothenberg actually exemplifies why we focus on earned media. When you have candidates as large as life as Hillary Clinton, it takes more than just $100 million in paid TV to change people's perception. It takes narratives, and the narratives that we do are formed through opposition research, through data points, and whatnot. So to give you an idea of the scope of our team at America Rising, we currently have several teams. One team is focused on presidential research, so just on Hillary Clinton, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the lessons learned. We have a team that's solely focused on U.S. Senate races, so every one of our research analysts is actually an expert in 2 to 3 Democrat candidates. We have a team that is focused on House Democrat candidates, so candidates to the U.S. House. We have a team that is focused just on gubernatorial races out in the states. We have a team of former lawyers who don't want to practice law anymore but want to be researchers, who are focused on state attorneys general races, which are very important within the United States. But also, one of the things that's unique about America Rising is the expertise we're bringing to the fore, where those former lawyers, we have a lot of lawyers who run for public office. It takes lawyers to understand the legal cases that these guys may have done while practicing law. So we have to hire lawyers to understand what's happening. We have a war room that operates almost 24 hours, 7 days a week, of young guys who are watching the news, local TV, national news, to see what our opponents are saying every single day. They track social media, they see what's uploaded to YouTube, and they alert our teams in real time so that our analysts can see it and take advantage of those opportunities. We have a video team that manages our database of over 25,000 video clips of Democrat candidates that we've compiled and tagged throughout the years. And then ultimately we get down to a couple different places. We have our comms team, which pushes out the information. And then we have a full-time lawyer on staff who just does public records requests of local, state, and the federal government. So that's a huge team, and ultimately we will do 15 House races this cycle, over 40 House races, 8 gubernatorial races, and over 40 state ledge races. This cycle we also did a district attorney's race, and to show how small you can get, we actually did a school board election out in one state. So that's how intense the Oppo is. So one thing in addition to the Oppo research that we do is candidate video tracking. We have a full-time and part-time network across the country of trackers who go to Democrat Party events. They go to Democrat candidate events to merely just to record them. And that video is then sent back to HQ for analysis as our analysts look for new opportunities to use against Democrat candidates. We do the video tracking on behalf of a number of GOP groups in which we send them the video after it's analyzed, in which they can then make their own set of decisions about the opportunities in which they want to do. And then we also look at that for our own purposes to see if there's information that we can push out as well. And to show how big tracking is in the United States, in 2014 we did a total of 3,300 events. This cycle already, we've done almost 4,600 Democratic events taped and filmed. And October is always our busiest month, naturally, so we will crush that number. And one new innovation that we're doing to make sure that our rapid response is as fast as possible is all of our trackers now can actually live stream Democrat events back to HQ and back to our partner organizations. So last week alone, before I came here, I was able to watch Democrat candidate events in Miami, Florida, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Manchester, New Hampshire, all from Washington, D.C. And so were all of our partner groups. Because when we want to do rapid response, time matters. What better than seeing it as it's happening to determine what our opponents are saying and how we can effectively respond. And ultimately what we've done is created a system. You know, that's the biggest thing I want to leave you guys with is each of those components can work individually, but together they create a system in which we can put Democrats, in which we have put Democrats on defense in the United States. And we have a very famous case study that we are very well known for in 2014 that really exemplifies how that system comes together. There was a candidate named Bruce Braley who was running for the U.S. U.S. Senate seat in Iowa. He was considered a very formidable candidate. He was a congressman. The Republican primary field was very much split. So when we started to do the research in this race in 2013, none of our partner groups were interested. They thought this Senate seat was gone. It wasn't a pickup opportunity for the Republicans. So we started to do the research. We deployed a video tracker, all in the fall of 2013. And then in March of 2014, Bruce Braley actually went to an event in South Texas, so very far away from Iowa, in which he was filmed talking about, he was filmed criticizing, quote unquote, farmers from Iowa. He said behind closed doors that if the Republicans won the U.S. Senate majority, you would have Chuck Grassley, a farmer from Iowa, take over the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. And for that crowd of trial lawyers, that was a big no-no. So he was appealing to his audience. The problem was he was filmed. We obtained the video. America Rising put it out publicly. The Des Moines Register carried it on their front page the next day. The local TV news carried it at the top of the 6 p.m. hour. And ultimately, that video ended up in $3 million worth of ads run by our partner organizations against him. Because ultimately, what don't you do in Iowa? You don't criticize Iowa farmers. And ultimately, Joni Ernst was elected. So let me see. So now we're going to see if the video works to show you how it all kind of came together. Ooh. News. Well, I tried to one-up the Cruz guys yesterday.
There we go. Tort reform for 30 years in a visible and public way on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Or you might have a farmer from Iowa never went to law school, never practiced law, serving as the next chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Because if Democrats lose the majority, Chuck Grassley will be the next chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Let's call this the Braley effect. A week ago, we would have said Iowa leaned to Democratic, maybe even was safe Democratic. But we're going to keep a very close eye on it now, not because of anything Bruce Braley said at home, but because of a fateful trip 990 miles south to Corpus Christi, Texas, speaking to a group of trial lawyers. And listen, this is how not to run for Senate.
Iowa has a clear choice. Bruce Braley, trial lawyer and a Washington politician, supports Obamacare and caught putting down Chuck Grassley to an out-of-state crowd.
A farmer from Iowa who never went to law school.
The better choice, Joni Ernst, a mother and soldier. Ernst will fight to dismantle Obamacare and clean up Washington. And she'll never look down on farmers because Ernst is true Iowa. American Crossroads is responsible for the content of this advertising.
That was Iowa Senate candidate Bruce Braley back in March of this year. And while he did not win his race last night, he nailed it with that prediction. That Republican Iowa farmer without a law degree, Senator Chuck Grassley, is now in line to be the chairman of the powerful Senate Judiciary Committee. And that's just the start of some big changes.
So, actually, Bruce Braley now lives in Colorado. He had to move out of Iowa. It is embarrassing, and I won't even say, but it's embarrassing how little that moment cost America Rising to put together and to create, and ultimately it ended up making our paid media communications better in that race and turning the tide of that race. And that's all through the system that we've set up. In America Rising today, we work with the Republican National Committee, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the NRCC, and all the major super PACs to help them improve their earned media communications and their paid media communications. Because when we do opposition research, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, you know, it's about creating opportunities, and that's all we do, and that's all we focus on solely on the outside. So that's a little bit of the context of which when we talk about opposition research, how big it is becoming in the United States. And to put it in the context, too, America Rising is 65 people, and ultimately our budget is $15 million for this cycle alone. So we anticipate growing bigger as we go. So with the establishment of America Rising, I was thankfully able to take a leave of absence to go work for the Rubio for President campaign in November of 2015, where I ran their rapid response, their research, and their war room operation. I've been Marco's comms director in 2010, so it was a little bit of coming back home to work for him and help him as he confronted a 17-person field this was not checkers. This was not chess. This was really 3D chess that was going on throughout the Republican primary. Not only were we going head-to-head with people like Ted Cruz, but we were investing time and resources to get our opponents to attack each other. Why? Because we were all sitting on each other's voters. Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio went head-to-head in November of 2015 very early on because both campaigns realized that each other's voters' second choice was the other candidate. So if another one got out, it was going to benefit their candidate. That's why we went head-to-head. We spent a lot of time trying to get Ted Cruz and Donald Trump to fight amongst each other. That was the 3D chess that was going on during the campaign. I'll talk a little bit more about some specific examples. But when we talk about the role of opposition research in the 2016 election, there are going to be lessons learned. However, this is still a very unique cycle. We don't know quite fully how this is going to impact how we do political communications within the United States. Why? Because we had two larger-than-life candidates to ever deal with in Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Donald Trump being a celebrity, how much did he do that was unique to him? Could someone replicate his social media tactics? We don't know. And from an opposition research standpoint, Donald Trump was a dream candidate for an opposition researcher. Bankruptcies, use of foreign workers, all over the place on every single issue, sued numerous times, had Trump University. I could go through the entire list. None of what is happening in the past 96 hours is a surprise that it's out there. And we pushed all of this information against him, yet seemingly it didn't work against Donald Trump. However, I do think there are some lessons that we can draw from that experience and from the Rubio experience that will inform us going forward. So those lessons that I think so far for 2016, I'll go through each one of these. One is the importance of time, the importance of focus, the need for more deeper, impactful content, the infrastructure to produce constant content to fuel your supporters, and the idea that we should own our content, not necessarily rely on others to pass it around. So first, the importance of time. You know, our number one objective as political communicators is to sell a narrative. You heard a lot about that yesterday. Why my guy and why not the other guy? Very simple, plain as night and day. However, that's becoming harder in this Snapchat election era. And I use that phrase a little bit differently than the Bernie Sanders presentation yesterday. I think the Snapchat election is not about necessarily a platform. It's about people's attention spans and the fact that we don't have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news cycle anymore. We have 24 one-hour news cycles every single day. And controversies for a campaign arise and go just as fast as the next controversy comes and goes. And you could deal with 3 or 4 big breaking stories before it's even time for lunch. So attention spans are getting smaller, the news cycle is getting crunched, and that creates the need for narratives. They're going to take longer to form. And we saw that in the 2016 election, which I'll go into. They take more data points to sell those narratives, more content to sell those narratives. And my belief is that candidates in 2020 will have to almost begin now to start selling their narratives. And I think 2016 was a perfect A/B test for why we need longer to sell our narratives in this Snapchat era. So for the perfect test is one, Hillary Clinton. You know, America Rising began researching Hillary Clinton in 2013, from the very first day we were formed. 2 years before she would even announce that she was a candidate, we were compiling the opposition research. We were doing the war room media monitoring. We were responding to everything she did, and we were tracking and recording all of her events for our video database. Why did we start this early? Well, look where her approval and favorability numbers were at the beginning of 2013. She left office as a very popular Secretary of State. And when you have 100% name ID, it's going to take time to change those perceptions. In our case, it took 3 years almost to flip those numbers beginning in 2015, and that took a daily drumbeat of hits from GOP groups and from America Rising. So, for example, when she said in 2014 that she and Bill were quote-unquote dead broke coming out of the White House, we were the first to attack that. We pushed stories on the Clinton Foundation and all the pay-to-play possibilities that were there. We worked with the media and so forth on questions that they had about Hillary Clinton. And ultimately, our research fell into 3 different buckets on her. One was dishonesty. The second was out of touch. And the third was a weak Secretary of State record. And we kept pounding those themes for 3 years. And ultimately, her numbers flipped. And amazingly, at one point, and this is pre-Trump tape, pre-debate, her numbers on dishonesty rivaled those of Donald Trump's. So it is my fundamental belief that Hillary Clinton is a very weak candidate, but that took 3 years of narrative building on her. And this is kind of a practical, funny example of what we were doing on a day-to-day basis against Hillary Clinton. You know, for example, on Out of Touch, Hillary Clinton wanted to very much look like she was a New Yorker just ahead of the New York primary. So what does a New Yorker do? They take the New York City subway. Our analysts were watching the cable news as that event was happening live.
Bernie, the
This is
reason
what they
that you
caught.
all think it's breaking news is because Bernie promised from the beginning, and that was part of his charm, to run a really positive campaign about the issues. And since the beginning of March, it's gotten more and more negative, and he's been attacking her character over and over and over again on almost every speech. And so, you know, she responded in terms of not doing...
So what did you notice? She had trouble getting through the gate. So what was great about that is that our war room was watching that happen live, and we've trained our war room to watch the event, not necessarily listen to the two pundits on the side. You could get easily distracted by the pundits, but if you were watching Hillary Clinton, you saw what was supposed to be an average New Yorker having trouble getting on the New York subway. So we instantly clipped that, put it up on YouTube, has more than 1 million views, broke through, went viral, became a story amongst all the national media and in the local media in New York City. And it broke through so much that it actually ended up on Saturday Night Live to drive our out-of-touch narrative.
But enough about the past. It's time to look forward to the future. And right now, my focus is here in New York. God, I love being back in the Fat Apple, my home state, except for Illinois and Arkansas, but they already voted for me, so we could. And gosh, New York has been cold this week, hasn't it? In fact, my head is getting a little chilly. I better put on my favorite hat that I've worn so many times over the years. Here we go. That'll keep me warm while I eat my favorite dinner, a classic New York City street hot dog. Delicious, real bite that was. And for dessert, all you New Yorkers know that I am just nuts for nuts. And later tonight, I'm going to take in that hot new Broadway show that's got all of NYC abuzz, Chicago. But you know what my favorite part about New York is? The subway. I love to ride it, and I am comfortable riding it. In fact, here's me using it earlier today. The New York City subway is the best way to get around. It's been a while. Is this a working Metro card? Is it? I'll just go in the old-fashioned thing. I'll take a cab. It's the best way to get around.
So that's a gold moment right there for our war room who is watching her. You know, we don't know anyone at Saturday Night Live. I'm sure they never want to talk to someone from America Rising. But that moment had broken through so much for Saturday Night Live to do a skit. All it cost us was a war room operation. And it cost her probably millions in bad earned media and selling that out-of-touch narrative. So that was what we were doing for 3 years. Flip to the GOP primary. You know, for Donald Trump, it was too much information, actually too late from our side. This is where I actually agree with one thing that Ken Cuccinelli said yesterday that I'll hit on in a moment. You know, I came on board with Marco in November of 2015. Within the first week, we were battling it out with Ted Cruz. We did not feel like we were in a position to take on Donald Trump until after the Iowa caucuses, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, 5 days before Super Tuesday, in which more than 10 states were going to vote. And we finally took on Donald Trump at a Houston debate where Marco literally dropped a ton of oppo on Donald Trump, went after him very hard, and I think actually looked really good doing it. You know, the problem is, you know, one of his big attacks was, and I'll read it verbatim, people can look it up. I'm sure people are Googling it right now. Trump Polish workers. You'll see $1 million for hiring illegal workers on one of his projects he did. That is a very famous story from the early 1990s in which Donald Trump had hired foreign workers to build Trump Towers down in New York City. So this was a real hypocrisy moment and really well known among GOP operatives. Everyone had it in their research book on Donald Trump. And when Marco said, please Google it, you know, we saw a surge of 300% of people searching it. You would think that we would be really happy with that outcome. Actually, it was quite depressing. It was depressing because no one outside of GOP operatives had heard that story before. 5 days before millions of people were ready to vote. Everything was new information. People hadn't heard about the bankruptcies. They hadn't heard about big details on Donald Trump's past that we could have been pushing. And talk about time, as Oppo is dropped closer to an election, it's my feeling that voters more easily dismiss it because it's seen as biased information or desperate information. And here we were doing it 5 days before the GOP Super Tuesday primary. And what we realized at that point was that Donald Trump has spent much of the fall of 2015 locking in his voters. We all thought that Donald Trump was going to be the Herman Cain or the Newt Gingrich of 2012, people who rose up very quickly and then fell underneath their own weight. How could you not think that with moments like the POW moment, the Megyn Kelly moment, or so forth? But what Donald Trump really was the Mitt Romney of 2012. Mitt withstood all those surges by other candidates while he gradually locked in 20, 25%, 30% of the electorate. And that's exactly what Donald Trump was doing during the fall of 2015 when no one was touching him. And ultimately, we saw this very clearly in Nevada. After Marco had surged after a very bad finish in New Hampshire to being second in South Carolina, we were going to Nevada with what we thought was momentum. But according to the exit polls, nearly 70% of caucus goers in Nevada had made their decision more than a week out from the actual election. And amazingly, 49% had decided more than a month before the actual election. Donald Trump had locked in his vote. So 70% of the electorate was not basing their vote on new information, new Oppo, while 30% who did overwhelmingly went for Marco. So we were dealing with two very different electorates, which is why I agree with Ken Cuccinelli yesterday, who said the attacks on Donald Trump came too late and had to have started right off the bat in July of 2015, because Donald Trump is very much like Hillary Clinton. He is a larger-than-life character who is going to take more Oppo, more earned media communications, more narrative building to change what people perceive about him. And ultimately, time was on Trump's side during the GOP primary. The number one target of negative ads wasn't Donald Trump in the Republican primaries. It was Marco Rubio. Marco had $20 million before the New Hampshire primary in negative ads dropped against him. $20 million. Number one target. Right to Rise, the Jeb Bush super PAC that raised $100 million, their number one target was $30 million in negative TV ads against Marco Rubio. How much against Donald Trump? $5 million or less. So that's a staggering figure. The field was actually not focused on who actually won the nomination, but was focused on Marco. So that in many ways, time was playing to Trump's side there. Also, Jeb Bush had locked up a lot of the donor support, so we were playing catch-up when it came to the infrastructure lesson learned that I'll get to in a minute. And Trump was generating a huge amount of earned media. You heard about this yesterday. One stat that is just staggering. In February of 2016, Donald Trump produced as much free earned media from the media as John McCain spent on his entire presidential election in 2008. So 1 month. How do you compete against someone who produces that much earned media? So there are a lot of factors playing to Trump's favor, but I don't buy the premise that Donald Trump was unbeatable. I think it just would have taken a lot longer to beat him, and the ads campaign and the negative campaign had to have begun much sooner, but the field wasn't there and couldn't do it. So another important lesson learned from the Rubio experience was the importance of focus. Campaigns today, with the fracturing of the news environment and the news cycle, can quickly become overcome with all the incoming negative attacks from your opponents, but also opportunities to attack yourself. And that's also because reporters are under pressure now more than ever to produce content. I work for Marco in his Senate race right now, and you have a paper like the Tampa Bay Times, which I'm sure no one in this audience has ever read before, but it's a huge paper in Florida, has great political coverage, 3 political reporters. On any given day, those political reporters have to produce content for their political blog. They have to do numerous posts. They have to write for the next day. They have to write for Sunday's analysis piece. They have to do online live streaming shows. They have to go on local TV and national TV. So those reporters need new information all day long. It's why they report on blog items on fundraising emails, stuff that we easily dismiss. They post them up because they need to do a post. They need to get out more content. And into that environment, there's an opportunity to get lost in all of that information. In the primary, when you're facing fire from Jeb Bush, from John Kasich, from Ted Cruz, when you could wake up on any given day and one person is attacking you or 17 people are attacking you, you have to pick and choose what actually aligns with your message and what is your message and what actually is an opportunity for your message. When we do Republican National Committee campaign manager colleges in which we talk to them about opposition research and we train them in it, one thing that we teach them is there's a very simple principle behind opposition research. And it's a principle that every one of them learned actually in kindergarten. It's called show and tell. Tell is your message. Tell is why your opponent is bad. My opponent is a liberal. You need the show with it because the show is evidence behind why your opponent is a liberal. Why are those two things important together? Because voters are smart. Voters dismiss me, Joe Pounder, as a paid spokesman. However, what they can't dismiss is the evidence behind my message. So my opponent is a liberal. Why? Because he voted 99% of the time with Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama. That's the evidence. Every voter is like the jury in Law and Order. They need the case prosecuted to them. So ultimately, our job as operatives is to pick and choose what actually backs up our message about our opponent, what provides another data point behind our messaging. And I think one campaign that has actually really struggled with this until recently was Hillary Clinton, because she has a huge target in Donald Trump. You can pick and choose anything you want to do on any given day against Donald Trump. The question is, what actually backs up her message about Donald Trump? Lately, she's settled on unfit for office. That was her message last night in the debate. But at times, it's been he's too extreme for Republicans. He's a bad businessman. She hasn't settled on one message on Donald Trump, and it leads to a whole myriad of headlines about what she's doing and where her messaging is. On the flip side, during the Republican primary, a good case study on why focus is important is Marco was focused on Iowa in January of 2016 to perform well in the Iowa caucuses. At the same time, Chris Christie was focused almost exclusively on New Hampshire. We knew that we had to do well in New Hampshire, and we were concerned that Christie was rising in the polls there because there was a strong correlation between Rubio voters and Christie voters. So he was actually starting to steal our vote in the state. We knew that we had to take on Chris Christie, and we had a very clear message to do it, that he was not the conservative he portrayed himself to be. That was going to be our message at that point. Going into our fight with Chris Christie, we only had 10 pages of opposition research against him. It wasn't a huge file. To put that in context, our average Senate research book on a Democrat candidate is about 350 pages. So we had 10 pages of research going into a fight with Chris Christie. Thankfully, we were looking for an opportunity to hit our message point, and Chris Christie gave it to us when he went on CBS's Face the Nation to talk about why he was running for office and so forth. John Dickerson, the host of the show, didn't ask him anything really relevant during the actual broadcast. But then CBS posted up the entire extended interview online. And we watched the entire extended interview in which Chris Christie was asked why conservatives were upset that he had supported Justice Sonia Sotomayor, Obama's appointee to the Supreme Court, in which he blatantly then replied, "I never supported her. That's not true." Well, thankfully, one of our 10 pages of research was a full-page press release his campaign had put out in 2009 stating clearly, I support Justice Sonia Sotomayor's nomination. A clear contradiction and clearly backing up our central message that he was not the conservative he portrayed himself to be. So it was a huge evidence point for that, and we ended up driving that for a week in which we just kept hammering that point, not the conservative he promised to be. That was the tell. Our show was the Sonia Sotomayor example that we then extended to being on the Second Amendment, national security, and so forth. So we just kept hammering that point. And unfortunately for us, Chris Christie gave it back to Marco about 3 weeks later in a very infamous New Hampshire debate that I will not relive for you. Also, in the opposition research world, we're learning that we need to go deeper in our research to be more impactful in what we're doing, to truly break through in this Snapchat election era and grab people's attention. You know, we're learning that we have to go deeper into public records. That's why we have a full-time lawyer who just does local, state, and federal government requests for government officials' emails, their documents, and so forth, because those are opportunities that people haven't seen before. We're going and doing more field research than ever before. So we're going out into the county courthouses to pull documents on people. And obviously in the United States, as has been hit on before, you can pull a lot of information. We can pull their mortgages. We can pull their marriage licenses. We can pull their voter history. We can pull any lawsuits they've been involved with. We can pull the records on any businesses that they've ever owned, and so forth. The actual last field research trip that I did was in 2014. It was to Frankfort, Kentucky, and it was against Mitch McConnell's opponent, who was Allison Lundergan Grimes. She had been a lawyer. There was no reporting on anything that she had done as a lawyer, so he had to go into the county courthouses to pull all the cases that listed her name. And if you've ever been to Frankfort, Kentucky, I won't insult it because I'm being live streamed. But you go in and you get out. But ultimately, we were able to pull those documents, and we've actually found video that didn't exist online. And this is a big thing for us because there was a tendency about 5 years ago within the United States to treat Oppo research as just whatever you could find on Google. Google must have the answer to everything. Our average age of staffers is about 26 and a half years old. So everything is a Google to them. We're telling them that it's not. Most state and local governments have not converted to electronic records. So you actually have to go into those county courthouses. Why? Because if you find something there, you have something that no one else has. You have a piece of information that reporters didn't go find, that the public has never been able to look at before. And if it's a true research hit, it will make impactful headlines going forward. Also, you need the infrastructure to produce constant content now in this news environment. You know, I talked a little bit about this last night with Bernie Sanders and all the social media channels and platforms that he had. Now people have more access to information than ever before. The question is, are they accessing your information or your opponent's information? And you need the infrastructure to producing constant flow of content from your campaign. And within the United States, infrastructure in political campaigns was actually a very bad word about 10 years ago. Why? Because infrastructure meant overhead. It meant you were hiring an individual to do a job. You had to pay for their health insurance. You had to pay for their travel and so forth. And what did that mean? That meant more dollars that were not going to be put toward the ad campaign that started in September and October. Gradually, though, campaigns are realizing that they actually have to invest in a robust digital and communications team to producing that constant flow of content that can actually go out to your supporters, energize them to volunteer, energize them to donate, so you actually produce more donor money to put toward your ad campaign later on down the road. And campaigns are realizing that they can't lose every single news cycle until the ad campaigns start. So that's why, for example, in 2010, when I did Marco's Senate campaign, we had 3 communication staffers. Today, we have 9 communication staffers for a Senate race. That's almost unheard of in a U.S. Senate race. As of 5 years ago, there were political campaigns that didn't even have a communications director. So that is changing as we need to be producing more constant content, especially from an oppo standpoint. I think Donald Trump has really exemplified this point with all of his social media platforms going forward, using Twitter and so forth. Whether this can be duplicated for other candidates remains to be seen. But ultimately, he probably doesn't realize it, but he hit on the point that people were talking about yesterday. It's friend-to-friend contact. And friend-to-friend contact on Facebook, on Snapchat, or whatever platform they're using. As oppo researchers, the question is, what are they sharing? I want to have control over what they're sharing. I want to be producing the content that they will share about why my opponent shouldn't get elected. And to tell you how infrastructure is changing, this was actually a graphic that we put together in 2004, Matt Rhodes, myself, and the Bush-Cheney 2004 Rapid Response Team. This is how the world looked in 2004, where you had very static sources of information through the war room media monitoring coming into your campaign's rapid response cycle, where you saw what your opponent was saying, you saw what your opponent was pushing, and you saw if there was an opportunity there through your policy teams and your research teams to be the show behind your tell message, and then you push it out. It was a very simple process. You know, John Kerry would put out a press release. We would read the press release. We would determine if it was a real opportunity. And in the end, we would deploy a response to it. It's a very simple news cycle. That's when there were no live streams. There was no YouTube. There was no social media. This is how I think the world kind of looks today. It's just crazy out there. In the way that you still have that very simple process, but information is coming into the campaign from every single direction. You know, for example, on any given day, I could be responding as rapid response to something the Ted Cruz campaign was pushing into grassroots supporters in Iowa. The John Kasich campaign was pushing to supporters in New Hampshire. That one of our donors had heard through the grapevine. That Ted Cruz had said on TV that day, that Jeb Bush was saying, that Donald Trump was saying about Marco. And it was coming in from every different direction, every different source. And one source that I'll point out particularly is live streaming. You know, America Rising, we invested about 2 years ago in expanding our live stream capability, figuring that Meerkat was going to be a huge thing. It was not. But Periscope is, and every local TV station now in the United States is live streaming these candidate events. So we had to be able to capture that. So now America Rising can actually capture 20 live streams at any given time that our opponents are doing. So that's why we invested in our war room. Our war room is actually probably capturing this live stream right now. But at the end of the day, it is right now the news environment, I would say, is very chaotic. The news cycle comes and goes very fast. As campaign operatives, you know, we have to decide what we're responding to, how we're responding to it very fast. And one thing I definitely agree with yesterday is the example of a huge approval process for a tweet is no longer sustainable. That the campaign is going to have to become a little diffused in its approval process to be able to move faster and more aggressively. And this is the infrastructure that, for example, we built behind our Hillary Clinton effort. We have a team of 7 research analysts and 1 rapid response director who are in charge of different issues and parts of Hillary Clinton's record. They watch it every day. They're experts in that. They update their research every day. They monitor the events every single day. And ultimately what we've produced is nearly 5,000 pages of research on Hillary Clinton. Our research file on Hillary Clinton is now so big that we don't even know what we're sitting on anymore. And if one of our partners comes to us, we just say, hey, just ask us, do you have anything on Hillary Clinton and immigration? And we'll send you the whole topic. This has never been done before to create a research file this big. if the Bridge guys were here, I imagine they could have 3 times as much on Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, we've created this huge research file. We've added to our video database over 6,000 videos of Hillary Clinton, all of them transcribed and all of them tagged in our video database so we can make them text searchable, because sometimes we don't even know what we're sitting on. So we can type in Clinton and immigration at any given time and get all the video where she says the word immigration. We've tracked 230 events from her. We've sent over nearly 500 FOIA requests on her. We've not done a lawsuit, but other GOP groups have done a lot of lawsuits against her. And we've gone to nearly 70 field research sites. That's how extensive this is, and this is the research file that we built up because we realize we need to be constantly pushing out information on her to build those narratives and to change those narratives. So my final point, and then turn it over to questions. I think we need, now one of our lessons learned from the Rubio experience is we need to be going more directly to reporters, or to voters. The old model used to be take a piece of Oppo research, call a reporter, try to create a story in a headline, and that will create an echo chamber that goes around to all the voters. There's no reason to do that anymore. Now you can go directly to voters through social media, through digital, and give them the information that they want. You still need to work with reporters because reporters at the end of the day are the only ones who can ask the next question to a piece of research that you've taken only so far. They're the only ones who can still call a source and get information. I think Donald Trump taught that. One of the favorite words in any campaign is, let's get this around, no fingerprints, meaning we don't want anyone to associate us with this piece of information. Now with this Snapchat type of news cycle, I just don't think that exists anymore. Voters, polls after polls, say they don't like negative campaigning, but in verbatim after verbatim, they repeat the negative campaigning. So it works with them. They're not going to fault a campaign for putting out a piece of contrast messaging about their opponent. And the Trump standard was pretty clear. It was Lion Ted Cruz, it was Little Marco, and it was Low Energy Jeb. 3 devastating attacks on his opponent that he paid no price for saying. And it's realizing that in this fractured content source environment, opposition research actually needs greater voice behind it. You know, the only real leverage point that a campaign still has is the ability to own content, to push content that way, and to be a voice and to go on the record. It's harder to break through, so as we look at this fractured news environment in the United States, it's going to take greater ability to push this content and greater ownership of it going forward. So ultimately, that's it. That's our lessons learned. I hope you got the feel of what opposition research is like in the United States. Very aggressive, very fun. Opposition research has gone from the basement of most buildings to being the senior staff on most campaigns. It's a huge industry, and I hope you took some stuff away from it.